The day, ready to go. I'm sure it's going to be a very popular session. I can't guarantee we'll get to all the show of hands audience questions, so don't be afraid to ask questions on Twitter, hashtag CEO Summit. We'll curate those and ask as many as we can of our next speaker. I'm very excited to have here today. I'll save the name until the end, but I think the introduction will give it away pretty quickly. She first entered the New South Wales Parliament as the member for Willoughby in 22nd of March 2003. Buzz in, let's play on. She was elected leader of the Parliamentary Liberal Party on the 23rd of January 2017. Sworn in as the 45th Premier of New South Wales, having previously served as Treasurer and Minister for Industrial Relations in the Baird government since April 2015. Prior to that, she was appointed Minister for Transport following the election of the O'Farrell government in March 2011, served in that role for 4 years. Master of Commerce graduate from the University of New South Wales, and prior to entering Parliament, worked as General Manager for one of Australia's largest financial institutions. She's also completed studies in government and public administration. She's proud to say she lives in Willoughby and has a lifelong association with the area. So please, a big round of applause for the Honourable, the Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian.
Thank you, Adam, for that wonderful and generous introduction. And hello, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. I have addressed this summit before. It's always great to be back here. So what I wanted to do today is just give you a snapshot of how New South Wales is going as an economy, what some of our plans are for the future, and then take any questions from you. And a few people asked me when I walked into the room, how was your day? Was it a busy day? My day's always busy. But just to give you a snapshot of what I've done before I've come here today is we managed to announce, because of our strong budget, a strong economy, a $500 million road package in Western Sydney today. So I was out there talking to some happy residents who are happy about having decongested roads. And then I was able to launch a fantastic program where we're having Olympic athletes go into our high schools to inspire kids about leadership and teamwork and discipline. And we launched that today at Cranebrook, which is a great school in Penrith. And the students there were amazing. But to have three Olympic athletes in Matt Shervington and Jess Fox, and also Aidan Roach, who's in the water polo team, inspire those children, was really wonderful to watch. So that's some of the things I've been doing before I'm here today. But just like Adam Spencer, not as much as Adam Spencer, I do like my numbers. So what I thought I would do today, he's brilliant at it, is show you a few slides about where New South Wales was and where we are now, and what that means for all of us. Because I use the examples of some of the programs I had launched or announced this morning, because we all know, unless you have a very healthy balance sheet and a strong budget, a strong economy, you can't really make new investments, whether it's in infrastructure or services. And that's certainly how I approach my role. So on the left-hand side, I just want to show how New South Wales is leading the nation in a whole range of areas. So if you look at our GSP, or gross state product, we are growing faster than all the other states combined. But interesting to note, that's off a high base, so it's growth on growth on growth. And we're thrilled that the change, when we came to government, we were the slowest growing economy in mainland Australia. Only Tasmania was slower than us. We had the worst jobs growth, the worst economic growth, and we managed to turn that around in just a few years. So that is very pleasing, because that obviously means more product and more strength to our economy. And on the right-hand side, pleasingly, we now have the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. We used to have the highest when we came to government, and I'm pleased to say that in the last 5 or 6 years alone, we've created in excess of 500,000 new jobs to our economy. And that's obviously the red bar is the rest of Australia, and that's New South Wales in terms of unemployment. And what is really pleasing in New South Wales is that much of the jobs growth are full-time jobs as opposed to part-time or casual jobs. And we've also seen an increase in the number of women in permanent full-time jobs as well, or the proportion of women. Just to demonstrate to you how hard we've worked to improve our economic management. On the left-hand side, the graph shows that when we came to government, our budget was facing deficits. And in the first couple of years, we had deficits as well. So the blue bars are when we came to government. And so you see in the first 2 years, we weren't able, obviously it took us some time to repair the budget and fix our position. And now we're providing healthy surpluses, which are averaging around $1.5 billion over the forward estimates. And why is that important? It means you can invest in the infrastructure and the services, some of which I mentioned to you already. But my job is to make sure we improve the quality of life of our citizens, citizens and provide that infrastructure and jobs and also extra services into the future. And you can't do that unless you have a strong budget. So it's really taken us, it took us a few years to repair the budget, and obviously all the investments you see now across New South Wales are a result of that improved position. And what really excites me is if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, which is about net debt. So the way the government works out its finances, we have the general government sector. So every year when the Treasurer talks about the state budget, and I've had the pleasure of delivering a few state budgets, you have about $75 billion which you account for in the general government sector. So you explain where you're spending that money and obviously where you're getting your revenue from. But in the general government sector, we do not have any debt. We actually have a cash positive situation, which has never happened before in New South Wales, and we're the only government in Australia that has zero debt. And just to put that into context, in the next graph, it shows how much we're investing in infrastructure, and that's real dollars. So the green is the Commonwealth. So over the next 4 years, our investment in infrastructure in New South Wales alone is greater than all those states and Commonwealth that you see. Interestingly, we're spending about double what Victoria is on infrastructure, but Victoria's having to borrow to pay their infrastructure, and we don't have to borrow. We've actually got our cash reserves because we're managing our budget and the economy so well. I can't claim to manage all aspects of the New South Wales economy, but certainly our budget position and our policies, which we believe are generating business investment and confidence, is certainly contributing massively to economic growth. Now, on the right-hand side, this is also a graph that I love, and if you'd shown me this 6 months ago, the differential would have been even greater. But business investment in New South Wales is far stronger than any other state. And in fact, the rate of growth of business investment is in double digits in New South Wales. So unfortunately, in the last 2 years, it was contracting in other states. So business investment was going backwards. But in New South Wales, it's actually been growing in double digits. 2 years ago, it was growing at about 18%. It's now growing at about 11%, but that's off a high base. So I'm really excited that business has confidence to invest in New South Wales, and that's continuing at a very strong and rapid trend. And what are missions for the future? Well, obviously, as a government, we want to make sure we're enabling businesses to do what they do. So by cutting things like payroll tax and removing lots of stamp duty on non-real property transfers, we're providing businesses more opportunities to invest. We're tackling things like the cost of energy, which aren't just obviously pressure on households, but also pressure on businesses. We're investing a lot on training our future workforce. So when you've got major construction and major infrastructure happening, you actually need to make sure you've got sufficient tradies as well as engineers, as well as project managers. And for any of you involved in project management, you know that if you don't have good project managers, projects fail. So I can see a few snickers around the room to that one. But certainly training our future workforce is something we take very seriously, and given we do have a huge jobs growth program and the jobs are growing so thick and fast in New South Wales, we have programs in place such as providing 100,000 free apprenticeships over the next 4 years. So anyone who does a trade in New South Wales doesn't have to pay for it. That means the business doesn't have to pay for it either. But these are just some of the examples of what we're doing to prepare our population and our workforce for the future. And of course, we're also always about economic game changers, and one of the biggest economic game changer, the writing's a bit small, but in the body of that plane, it looks like an A380, it should say Aerotropolis. So out in Western Sydney at Badgerys Creek, we're building, the federal government's building the second Sydney airport, but our job as a state government is to build the city around that airport, and we're calling it the Aerotropolis, or the airport city. And so far, we've managed to sign memorandums of understanding with many top Australian companies and also global companies who are setting up shop there. So our vision for an economic game changer into the future is providing, say, the base of robotics in Australia, or the space industry, or those industries of the future, which is really going to keep giving New South Wales the edge. So when you're standing in Parramatta, you won't be looking east here for the best jobs, you'll be looking west to the new airport precinct. And I'm really excited by what we're doing there. And some of you might know some companies like Northrop Grumman, which is a big defence company, has already put down $50 million to set up shop there. Top Australian pharmaceutical company has done the same, as have quite a few Japanese banks and organisations, as well as other global players. And for the first time in Australia, What else will be a big game changer in that precinct is we have a single campus multi-university. So 4 of our top universities have combined forces to provide great research and student facilities there to really support the growth of industry into that precinct. So I just wanted to share that one example with you as what is an economic game changer. So ladies and gentlemen, I can imagine that all of you are CEOs or senior managers or senior executives in companies with varying scale and varying industries. But I think, like myself, the things you keep your eye on are the things that I have to keep my eye on in terms of the entire state, and that is to make sure we think about not only the strength of our budget and the economy, but also what are the issues that we need to be ahead of to give ourselves the edge into the future. And what that means for me is when I think about what gives New South Wales the edge in the future, I think about what is going to enhance the quality of life of our citizens, and that is a great thing to wake up to every morning. So thank you very much for allowing me to make these brief comments. I wanted to leave heaps of time for questions, and Adam is one of the best mediators there is, so you will do that for me, won't you, Adam? Thanks, everybody.
A round of applause for the Premier, please. Big Australia, big New South Wales, bloody big Sydney. So there are issues of congestion and access. At the same time, it is that growing population that's fueled some of that great growth story. It's so hard for you. How do you get that balance right?
Certainly. Well, we came to government with about a $30 billion infrastructure backlog. So whilst the population had been growing in New South Wales, there wasn't the infrastructure to support it. So that's why our infrastructure, we repaired the budget, and our infrastructure spend over the next 4 years alone is $90 billion. In the last 7 years, we've already invested $110 billion. But as you know, building a metro line takes time. So we're about to open the Northwest Metro, which is the first metro in the whole of Australia. But from start to finish, that took 7 years to build once tunnel boring machines went into the ground. So in the next 18 months, Adam, there will be massive relief as 3 or 4 big projects come online. People will start feeling the ease of congestion. But having said that, I very controversially put up my hand and said until we've caught up on our infrastructure, which we should take a bit of a breather when it comes to growth, including immigration, you can't control interstate migration, but when a state's doing well and creating jobs, we actually saw as the mining sectors went through a downturn in WA and Queensland, we saw a lot of workers come in New South Wales, which then increases demand also and puts pressure on housing and everything else. So I've suggested we take a bit of a breather in terms of our population growth until that infrastructure comes online. But I'm incredibly proud of what we've done to date with getting our state and our city moving. And in fact, hard to believe, but previously social infrastructure wasn't given enough attention, but we've managed to build or upgrade 100 hospitals around the state since we've been here, because when you've got a growing population, they should be able to access best health and education, and especially if workers are coming in from other states, there's demand on those things. So we've put a real emphasis in our social infrastructure to make sure those demands are met. But I could speak for hours on that topic, but I've probably answered it too long anyway.
Back in the room, what would you like to ask?
Premier, my security company is a major employer of people with disabilities. About 5 years ago, I gave a job to a young quadriplegic male who had not worked for 7 years. He'd been on the dole for all of that period. I gave him a job. My reward as an employer for doing so was payroll tax. Now, I think in general you're among friends here, but there is a view that you'll be on the receiving end from the Labor Party, that the Liberals are friends with big business, friends with banks and so forth. But when I hear that you're attracting Japanese banks, $50 million companies to the western suburbs, but small businesses are still paying payroll tax despite having been told that the GST will make this go away, you need to appreciate that this is a huge imposition on employment, on small businesses, on people who are risking their homes and their livelihood, and very soon, thanks to the Royal Commission, will find it even harder to borrow money. You've indicated in one of your slides that you'll be cutting payroll tax. I think everyone here would be interested to know why that word isn't eliminating as opposed to cutting, because most of the cuts I've seen generally come in the form of some kind of rebate for which 2 or 3 years later you waste a whole lot of time and money on rebates. It's time for payroll tax to go. You look like you've now got the money to do so.
What are your thoughts on payroll tax, Premier?
Oh, regrettably, Can I just say, regrettably, state governments, and I was the first to put up my hand and say we should have a conversation about major tax reform between the federal and state governments. The federal government collects all the income tax, and traditionally the states are left with the cost of providing infrastructure and services, and every single state-based tax is pretty much an incentive-based tax. So you're taxing people for creating jobs through payroll tax, and you're taxing people through land tax and stamp duty. I'd love to eliminate all those taxes, but it involves a broader conversation than just New South Wales, but I'm up for that. If my state colleagues in the federal government said, let's modernise the federation, I would be up for looking at one simple solution, but I can't do that. My hands are tied until that situation. But in the meantime, can I say the following? We did provide relief from payroll tax by increasing the threshold once about 2 years ago, which meant that a number of additional businesses were excluded from paying payroll tax. And at the last budget, we announced further cuts in payroll tax. And because you use the L word, the Labor Party word, I will say the Labor Party's opposed those payroll tax cuts, even though we did it to support small businesses. And over the next 3 years, we want to see there's actually an incremental increase in the threshold. So you're getting relief year on year if you're legitimately a small to medium-sized business. And the Labor Party opposes that. It does cost us about $1 billion over the forward estimates. It's not insignificant. But what the pressure we have on our budget is the day-to-day expenses, the recurrent budget. The capital side, building the infrastructure, is the easy bit to manage, but what is really hard, and payroll tax comes in on the recurrent side, is managing the day-to-day expenses. So every time we build a hospital, we have to pay for the day-to-day operations, the nurses, the doctors, the midwives, and the operations of running that. So payroll tax is definitely in the mix for what we've promised we're reducing. In fact, we've already started that process. Believe me, I get it. We want job creation in New South Wales to be driven by the private sector, not the public sector. Right? We want small businesses to be the ones that employ people and medium-sized businesses, and that's why we have given relief to small businesses through previous payroll tax cuts and the cuts we're currently putting in place. Believe me, I hear you and I get it. I'd love to be able to eliminate payroll tax from New South Wales. I can't in the absence of major economic reform between the Commonwealth and the states, because if I eliminate payroll tax, I lose a significant billions over the forward estimates, which means I can't provide more nurses and police and other things. So that's the challenge we face. Unfortunately, states do have to rely on that. But obviously, because of our strong position, we're giving businesses relief and saying we'll pay for an extra $1 billion worth over the next 4 years to give small business relief from payroll tax. But we're also doing other things. Because the economy is running well and we are providing lots of jobs growth, that is also ensuring that businesses have greater opportunities to invest and look at opportunities to find scale. Can I commend you for employing someone with a disability? And we should definitely encourage that and support you. In the public service in New South Wales, one of the Premier's priorities is to have more diversity, but that is one area where we're not doing as well as that we should. So gender diversity is okay in the public sector, and other diversity things are okay, but not in terms of employing people with a disability. So that is something that I specifically took on board just last year, and I commend you for doing that. Good on you. And if we can provide support for more small businesses to do that, we should. So thanks for that.
Question down the front here. What would you like to ask?
Thank you very much, Premier, and congratulations on the job you're doing. I wondered if you'd like to say a little bit more about vocational education and training, which is so important to all businesses, large and small. I ask in particular because I've been a little bit bothered about problems in that sector, one being the performance of some of the private training providers, which have hardly covered themselves in glory, and the other, the evident sort of reduction in the size and capability perhaps of TAFE as a public provider.
Well, we don't apologise for overhauling TAFE when we came to government. So most of you obviously have a lot to do with TAFE. And if I can say this respectfully, we feel very strongly that TAFE is somewhere to give people skills and allow them to get jobs or retraining, not to kind of do the hobby type of courses at TAFE. And so we got into a bit of, people thought that was controversial when we said you can do the hobby type things elsewhere, but TAFE needs to focus on either giving young people the skills to have careers or retraining people of all stages in life, because we know with disruption in the workforce, we need to have retraining opportunities for mature age workers, as well as, when I say mature age, anyone beyond their 20s, as well as the newbies coming out of school. So we did overhaul TAFE and made it much more professional. And we have seen now enrolments go up. So initially that didn't happen because we were restructuring and refocusing what TAFE was doing. And secondly, what we've done, which I think is really cool, is, and Mount Druitt's a good example, we've actually asked industry to tell us what courses they want TAFE to do so they can have employees. So for example, if you're a middle-sized contractor working on a road construction project, or you're someone that has a particular piece of machinery that you need training in, Mount Druitt TAFE can actually help develop a course with you on your specific machinery types to make sure that the people are trained through that. So we are trying to involve industry much more in the development of the courses so that the employees and the skills they acquire actually allow them firstly to work, which is a great outcome, but also provide what industry needs as well. Because one of the big capacity constraints we have in New South Wales isn't the capital dollars to go into projects, but it's the capacity of job skills, and we don't want to see that go up, and lots of other capacity issues. So that's why we do put a lot of effort into vocational education and training. I'm someone who does like competition, and TAFE obviously is the main provider, and we support TAFE substantially, but I don't begrudge other people so long as they follow the proper accreditation to also offer courses, and I think that should be encouraged because competition is not a bad thing but a good thing. And additionally, the big boost we gave to 100,000 free apprenticeships hopefully will encourage people to take up. We need more apprentices, we need more trades, and often that's a cost on business, so now we wear that cost. So if you had to spend between $6,000 and $9,000 paying for someone's tuition, we now wear that cost and do it happily. It means sometimes the employer doesn't, the young person does, or the older person. And I was really encouraged. I met a woman working on the North West Rail Line who had trained to be a sparky, an electrician. She was about my age. She looked young like me, but, in her 40s. And she became an electrician in her 40s and was working on the North West Rail Line. And I thought, what a great example. So there's more I could say, but I get your question, and please know that when you have a massive infrastructure program, as we do in New South Wales, jobs, skills and training is key to that, but it also are the kind of issues I know that many of you would be occupied with on a daily basis.
Got a question online here, Premier, possibly the only area of education that's more complicated than TAFE and that sort of stuff. High school, educating our next generation is critical for investing in our future, says Naresh. What's your position on this and the dismantling of Gonski? So I'll take the word dismantling out there. On the whole Gonski journey, where are we?
New South Wales was the first state to sign up to Gonski, and we are now the state providing the most funding. We actually got it, when we first announced that we should have needs-based funding in education, everybody mocked us. But we have stuck to that. The money needs to follow the students. And we have record investments in education. We're the first state to sign up to Gonski, and when other levels of government didn't put in the funds that we thought they should, we topped it up. So we make sure in New South Wales, because what I believe in very strongly, and I went to public schools, is whether you go to a public school, a non-government school, a Catholic school, they are choices for parents, and parents deserve to have those choices. But every single school should provide a student with the best chance in life, irrespective of where the child goes. And for that reason, we have continued to be the Gonski state and will continue to do so. But we wouldn't have been able to do that had we not had the strong budget position. So when it's a choice of contributing more to Gonski, with all due respect, or eliminating payroll tax, you can see the dilemma governments have in terms of those expenses. And that's why we've made education one of our absolute priorities. And in infrastructure alone, we're investing more than $6 billion in 170 new schools over the next 4 years. And on term one this year, I was really excited. So school went back last week, or depending on the year, schools go back to. But we opened 17 new schools on day one. So 17 schools around the state, kids were able to go to brand new schools, and many of them went to brand new upgraded classrooms. And now we're also putting in an extra $500 million to retrofit air conditioning across all those schools that are a bit older and never had it. So let me assure you, I could talk for longer on this topic, but I won't. You can see how passionate I am. But I think education is the greatest enabler there is. And if you do believe in quality of life and opportunity for everybody, you have to provide great education standards, no matter where the people go to school, no matter what the postcode is. And Adam will be very happy with this. I'm also passionate about getting more kids to study maths for the HSC. And short of making it compulsory, which is this much away, I said I want programs in place to encourage every student to do maths. And some students at the moment, the really bright ones, don't do maths because it helps them if they do other subjects to get into uni for various things. So I want to put a bit more of an equaliser there to encourage kids, because whether you're a tradie or a professional or running a business or just running your life, you need to be able to have some level of maths, and we need to make sure all kids are encouraged to do that.
Just on behalf of parents of kids who also went back to schools that were already existing, thank you so much for opening them again too, because after the Christmas holidays, bloody hell. We've got an audience question here front and centre.
Relief.
This will probably be our last audience question. Fire away, ma'am. What do you want to say?
Okay, Premier, it was very interesting about your passion about education and in particular maths, but across the board, STEM is very important, or now STEAM, incorporating the arts.
Yeah.
So what is your thoughts on how we're changing the education system in New South Wales to incorporate that and grow that?
It's surprising for many of you to know that the last time the curriculum was reviewed in New South Wales was in 1988, which was 31 years ago. So, which is pretty amazing. I want education not to be a lag, but to be a step ahead of what's happening out there in the real world, and which is why we're undergoing the curriculum now. I do want to see more STEAM, and I want to see also back to basics. You know, numeracy and literacy are key issues, especially in the modern age. When I get texts from my godchildren or whatever else, you know, the shortcuts people use these days has a lot to be desired. But anyway, that's another topic. I won't get too much into that, but I will say that for me, getting back to basics is absolutely critical, but also preparing our young people for the prospect of changing jobs and careers every couple of years. More and more of them want to run their own businesses and do their own thing and not have a boss to answer to. So we have to give them the skills and the confidence to be able to do that in life, because by helping them, we're helping our state and the future prosperity of New South Wales. And so that curriculum review is currently going. In terms of STEM and STEAM, we've invested a lot of money in providing technology. And ironically, you now see, obviously maths and arts and 3D printing, all the disciplines are kind of merging. And in the future, my prediction is, and if I'm wrong, none of you remember, future engineering, and apologies for the engineers in the room, may be a mix of trade. Like you might do a few TAFE courses and do some courses at uni. Like we could have hybrid models where the distinction between a modern engineer or a robot or someone who runs a robotics production line, and we've got to be ready for that. And the best way to do that is provide the kids with those skills. And what I really love is when I visit kids in kindergarten, so 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds, first year of school, they're learning how to code. They don't know it's coding, but they're taught to move things 3 up and 2 across and then see something happen. So we're developing that from the age of 5, because I don't want our state to fall behind. We want to be leaders in the future. So we're really, and I was very proud to announce the Premier's Coding Challenge. We have a Premier's Reading Challenge, and that came into force last year. We piloted it in 50 schools, and the Year 7 and 8 kids that I saw that engaged in it, I thought, wow. If they patent some of their stuff, because the ideas they have are boundless, I suggested to a few of them to patent some of the stuff. They're all really obsessed with security stuff. A lot of them did things with lights turning on and security stuff, which is really interesting. But anyway, so I hope I've given you a snapshot of what's happening in our high schools, but also what we want to see, and I've spoken about this publicly before, is offer kids or children, students, greater opportunities to start some of their tertiary education whilst they're in high school. So imagine if you could do half of your apprenticeship, because before we allowed kids to leave school at 16 and do a trade. These years when we make them, well, I think it's a good thing that they're encouraged to start at school till they're 18, but then it means if you're doing apprenticeship and want to get into the workforce, you're looking at another 4 or 5 years on top of that. So we're looking at more opportunities to have apprenticeships conducted, at least for part of the high school experience, if that's what the direction the student wants to go into, as well as, of course, some pre-university subjects, if that's possible as well. So we're trying to think outside the box in terms of what our education system provides.
Final question in closing. It's wonderful to have you here today. One story very quickly. A friend of mine who works in federal politics was at an event that the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was speaking at, and my friend was escorting a US, I think it was a senator, but a high American politician, and Malcolm Turnbull spoke for a few minutes and said, look, I'll just take questions, fire away. And the US senator turned to my mate and said, what's going on here? He said, oh, he's just going to take some questions. Hold it, sorry, he's taking unscripted. Yeah, it's just, Hold it, your Prime Minister is about to take unscripted questions from a room of people who he doesn't know. Yeah, he does it all the time. And the American guy was literally sweating bullets at the thought. We're so lucky in this country that a Premier or a Prime Minister will just go up and go, hit me with anything you've got. These are my thoughts. It's been wonderful. Can I ask you, in closing, on a slightly more personal note, you're effectively CEO of the state, right?
Well, you know what? I say I'm very focused on detail, and people around me say you should act like a chairman, not a CEO. Now, that's a matter of dispute, so I'll leave it to you as to whether I should be a chair or a CEO.
But all these people facing their own leadership challenges know they have certain skill strengths that make them really good at what they do, and they also look at their own skill set when they first became a leader and thought, wow, I need to work on that a little bit. So when you took the transition from significant ministerial position to Premier, answer these in either order, but what do you think was your best strength in taking it on? And what, after a couple of months, did you realise, wow, I'm going to have to work on that a bit?
My best strength was also my biggest weakness, and that is I love being across my brief. If I don't know something 100%, I don't like to act on it. But when you're the Premier, you have to be across a whole range of issues which can come up unexpectedly. And whilst, of course, you need to be across your brief on everything, sometimes you don't have the liberty of having the finite detail on everything. So you do need to consider and prioritise and decision make without knowing, 100,000 facts about one topic. So I've had to manage to let go and delegate at times, and that was my biggest challenge because I was used to controlling and being across everything and doing most things myself. And then when you become the Premier, you have to step it up and allow your colleagues and others to support you in what you're doing. So I think delegation and knowing what you need to know were probably the biggest challenges I faced. But the punters always tell you what the real weaknesses are, so I get free advice every day. I get free advice every day, and part of the other criticism I get is always, you don't talk enough about the message and what you're doing and blah, blah, blah. So I've tried to do a bit of that today. I hope I've been a bit successful.
Please give a big round of applause to the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, Premier of New South Wales. As the Premier leaves us and gets back to the very important job of running Australia's biggest and booming state, we're going to throw in one more final top 100 quiz question. So grab your Twitter-enabled devices, your last chance to go in the running for a copy of my latest book, personally autographed to you during our little post-event soiree. I love this question. I saw people struggling with the last one. This is good. In 1662, this brilliant and stridently religious mathematician wrote a famous list of 57 sins that he confessed to committing on or about the Easter Whitsunday. This is true. A list of 57 sins, including eating an apple in thy house, stealing cherry cobs from Edward Storer, and calling Dorothy Rose a jade. Who was the brilliant but stridently religious mathematician who in 1662 confessed to a list of 57 sins? Hit us up on hashtag CEO Summit, hashtag Top 100 to tweet your answer if you'd like to win a book. Just quickly on the topic of Twitter and trending, it was one of the organisers' real ambitions this year after we managed last year to trend in New South Wales, to try and trend nationally. And for the last couple of hours, CEO Summit has been trending nationally. So to Laurie and the team, how about a big round of applause? Congratulations, guys. They've worked so hard on getting it out there, and it's happening. And also, wanted me to mention the water bottles are being donated by Pronto. Grab one of those insulated water bottles each at the end of the day if you haven't already. Hit us on Twitter with the answer to that question as I now introduce our final speaker, a multi-award winning speaker, trend forecaster, and the writer of 6 best-selling books. 6. I've only written 5. Screw you, pallies. He's presented to over 300,000 people. Or to make it sound even more impressive, he's presented to Bill Gates, Steve Wozniak, and over 299,998 other people since 2004. He's our final speaker for CEO Summit 2019, extolling us to prepare now for what is next. Please, a big round of applause for Michael McQueen.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that very generous introduction. Well, it's great to be here to finish off what's been a pretty stellar day. Thank you, Laurie, and the rest of the conference crew for the invitation. How many of you have found today valuable, just out of curiosity? Hands up. Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? And I want to draw together so many of the themes we've heard about in this final session. It's going to be a very brief session because we've got a little bit to wrap up the day, then it's out to potentially more alcohol, I suspect, outside. So I want to make sure we stick to time. Before we start, though, can I see a show of hands? Who here has ever endured a boring or irrelevant presentation at a conference before? Hands up if you've experienced that phenomenon. Okay, almost all of you, almost unanimous. Okay, second question, be honest. Hands up if you were the one delivering that boring or irrelevant presentation at the time. Anyone brave enough? A few of you are brave enough. Well, my commitment to you is our session this afternoon will be neither of those two things, boring nor irrelevant. It's going to be practical. It's going to be very honest. Let's speak directly to the stuff that we are facing. Let's just not sort of dance around themes, but it's going to be a bit of fun because I reckon fun is often underrated at corporate gatherings. And we're going to pick up on so many of the themes and concepts that have been discussed so far. I thought Katrina's session was on point, and we'll touch on some of the themes that came up in that. As we look at this whole idea of how do we gear up for the stuff that's about to hit. If we look in the next 5 to 10 years, what are the trends that as leaders you cannot afford to not have on your radar? And of course, Paul started our day today looking at this whole idea of navigating turbulence. So we'll pick up on even that theme in the image up on the screen there. But just get our heads in the zone as we think about the future this afternoon. I want to start off with a bit of fun. We're going to kick off our time together with a game I'm going to call Tech Jargon Trivia. Okay, I want to see which of you are the technology buffs in the room this afternoon. Some people call them geeks. That seems unkind. So we'll call you technology buffs. And if you're listening carefully to what Katrina shared, she gave some hints as to what the answer to the question I'm about to ask you is. And this is the question I want to ask you this afternoon. By 2045, it is predicted that artificial intelligence, which we've heard so much about today, will pass which point? Okay, you're going to have multiple choice here, okay? Is it A, the point of insularity? Is it B, the point of disparity? Is it C, the point of singularity? Or is it D, the point of jocularity? Yeah, those are your 4 options. I'm going to give you a 10-second countdown. Compare notes to the people at your table. Then we'll come back and do a straw poll. So your 10-second countdown is there. Go for it. All right, there's your buzzer. Okay, show of hands, I reckon it might be A, the point of insularity. I think it could be A. All right, no A's. What about the point of disparity? Any B's? Any pops possibly? I love the lack of commitment here, like, I don't know. I'll give it a shot. What about C, the point of singularity? A few more. There's only a few in every crowd. Who's going to go for the point of jocularity? Anyone going to go for D? It's always one. Well done. There's 2 of you. Now, we did hear this word came out very briefly from Katrina's lips today. And she talked briefly about this whole notion of this point of singularity. The correct answer, of course, is C. And this whole idea of predicting what the future is going to hold, and I've had the Premier put it so well before that it's difficult to predict the future, but no one will remember what she will predict. I suspect we will, okay? But this is the great challenge, is how do we get our heads around exactly what is going to hit? And the truth is, people far smarter than you or I have got it really wrong over the years when it comes to predicting what the future is going to hold. So for instance, check this out. Back in 1883, Lord Kelvin went on record to say this: in the future, we will come to discover that X-rays were a hoax all along. Now, this dude was no fool. I mean, he was instrumental in formulating the first and second laws of thermodynamics. He came up with a way we still measure temperature today, but got it just a little bit wrong. What about the mid-50s, a prediction that within a decade we'd all have nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners in our homes? Or my mate Bill Gates, back in 2004, within 2 years, spam will be a thing of the past. Now, what amazes me is someone as bright as that can underestimate the tenacity of Nigerian princes, okay? But that's what he said, 2 years, all right? What about this one here? I bet this guy wishes he could take this forecast back. We honestly cannot see Netflix becoming a serious competitor anytime soon, said the CEO of Blockbuster Video. Famous last words, of course. And even though it's dicey to look at what the future's going to hold, let's spend some time doing that this afternoon. Because this is so much of the game of leadership, is trying to see what's coming around the corner so you can be ready for it before it arrives. And I was speaking with a colleague of mine recently at a conference in Singapore, and he put it so well. And if you don't know this guy, I'd highly recommend jotting his name down. I reckon right now, he's one of the most important thinkers when it comes to building an innovation culture in large, complex businesses, a guy named Gary Hamel. Who's familiar with Gary Hamel out of curiosity this afternoon? Only a few of you. Check him out, okay? Really interesting cat. And we were talking at this conference backstage, and just something he said as a throwaway line I thought was so insightful. And what Gary Hamel said was this. He said, you cannot outrun the future if you do not see it coming. And this is the challenge we all face. And I get it. Every single one of us is busier than ever, and it's so easy to get focused on the minutiae, the detail day to day. It's difficult sometimes to zoom back far enough to see, well, what is the stuff that's coming? And, by the way, to distinguish between disruptions and distractions. Because you have people in your team who are pretty across the technology and they'll tell you everything's about to change. Some of it's true, some of it's not. How do you figure out the difference between those things? And so let's have a look at what the next 5 to 10 years will hold right across the economy, different industries. And I want to look at 4 forms disruption is going to take for every single one in the room this afternoon. I wonder, of these 4 forms of disruption, which one do you think is going to be the biggest one for you? And I'd highly recommend jotting some notes down as we go along, because we'll come back to this list in just a couple of moments. But the first form of disruption we've heard a bit about today as we've gone along, and that is, of course, the impact of automation and AI and the rise of the robots. And I don't want to focus on this too much because we have already today, and there's some of you who love this stuff, some of you just get exhausted thinking about it, because it is stuff that does your head in if you think about it too long. But when you think about what AI, that narrow form of AI that Katrina talked about, is up to right now, and it's incredibly potent. And we've had a few examples today already, but one that I came across just before Christmas. The week before Christmas, an article in the New York Post, which you may not have noticed if you'd already fired down for the year for Christmas, an article which said we are now 24 months away from Alexa being able to predict with 75% accuracy whether a relationship or marriage is on the rocks or about to split up, by listening to the tone of the conversation in that house and how many arguments you have. And that goes to the very thing we talked about before, how powerful this stuff is getting, and by the way, just a little bit creepy as well, how it's invading our lives. And you look at one sector that is really embracing a lot of this technology, and Glenn talked about this in his session, looking at how retailing is trying to automate and use some of this technology in some really interesting ways. And I was speaking at a big retail summit in Chicago a few months ago, and they were all getting frothy and excited about facial recognition technology, and I get it, it's very exciting. But I did urge the attendees of this event, and these are all the big retail companies gathered, I said, we've got to be careful. There is a fine line between customizing the experience using this technology and just being downright creepy. I mean, to give you an idea of what's happening in the retail space with AI right now, this is an example here of what Walmart is testing right now, which is facial recognition tech that when you're walking through a Walmart store, it will identify your facial expression and your emotional state based on what's happening on your face and your body language. And if it looks like you are frustrated, confused, can't find an item, it'll alert a nearby staff member to come to your assistance. So best you not look like you're having a bad day at Walmart, okay? Or they would just pounce on you, okay? Now this example I only read about this morning and popped this slide in because I thought it was an interesting one. Walgreens, which is the big pharmacy chain over in the US, have just announced they're going to start rolling this out in stores across the nation in the next few months. These are smart fridge doors that have facial recognition technology in them. They will measure, or they'll be able to tell the age of the person standing in front of the fridge, their gender, in some cases their purchase history, and what is advertised on the front of that fridge will change based on who's standing on the other side of the door. I mean, this is Minority Report type stuff just here, and this was just announced 7 hours ago. So this is the stuff that is coming online. And I mean, looking at what's happening in China, and China was mentioned before, and I think it's important we look at that because this is really the bleeding edge of what's going on. This is a test by Alipay, which is Alibaba's, well, one of Alibaba's payment spin-offs. And Alipay tested this about 12 or 14 months ago at a KFC store. You walk up to the register, order your food, scans your face, charges your stored Alipay account with no need to reach for your wallet or a credit card at all. There's actually an example you'll see in a few moments of the person putting a wig on to try and trick the technology, and it's still got it right. And about the same time, by the way, a Lufthansa flight at LAX was boarded using no boarding passes, no passports, everything was facial recognition technology. That's how good this stuff's getting. Now, the reason I wanted to just talk about China briefly, and it was raised before from someone in this area, if I had some of the technology Chinese are using, I'd be able to know exactly who it was, your name, your date of birth, all that stuff quite quickly, because this is what's happening in China right now. They've been testing in recent times the use of this with their police force. And I was working with the South Australian Police Commissioner and some of his leadership team a few months ago. They're toying with this in Australia as well, trying to figure out where this fine line is. The test was done with a armed police in China with glasses that were backed up and linked to a database of faces. And in 1/100th of a second, they can identify every face in the crowd, match it against that database. And they tested this for 3 hours at a train station in southern China. They found 23 people traveling with fake ID, 7 convicted criminals on the run. That's how good this stuff's getting. Now, how many of you are not super familiar with Alibaba, just out of curiosity? Anyone not know a lot about Alibaba? Quite a few hands. Get to know them quickly. Honestly, because we talk about Google, we talk about Facebook and Amazon, and they're all doing some cool stuff with AI. Alibaba are the ones to watch. Now, the reason we need to watch them is because they're doing the most interesting stuff, and some of their counterparts in China are. Part of the reason being they can test this technology on a live population in a way we just couldn't do here. I mean, the civil libertarians would be in a flap if we tried to do a fraction of what's happening in China right now. In fact, if you're not familiar with the whole term or the concept of social credit, hands up if you haven't heard the term social credit before, okay? Quite a number of you. Google it. Not before you go to bed at night, okay? You probably won't sleep well. It's all I was trying to think of not dysphoria, dystopian stuff that we see in Black Mirror and the rest. So right now what's happening in China is they're monitoring the population as we sit here this afternoon, and you get a score based on how good a citizen you are. If your score falls below a certain point, you cannot engage in commerce, travel on public transport, you can't open a bank account, and this is happening as we sit here. So the question that came up before about what does this mean for governments using this stuff is a very valid and important question. Now, just to steer away from all the depressing stuff that makes you want to have more wine, perhaps on your table, if we look at one of the applications of AI that's been mentioned a few times throughout the day that I've been focusing on very closely for the last 24 months, is what happens when AI begins to drive our cars. And of course, who finds the whole notion of these autonomous driverless cars that we've heard about? Who finds the whole notion still a little bit terrifying? Hands up if you do. Come on, if you... Okay, lots of us do. Now, the reality is these are not as far off as most of us think. And I'm speaking to the people who are developing this tech pretty frequently. The expectation is these will probably be on our roads here in Australia. We're talking level 4 automation by the late 2020s. That's not far away. Now, level 4 automation, by the way, is where you hop in the car, plug in your destination and touch nothing else. If you've got a Tesla right now, your car's got this built into it already. It's just switched off because it's not allowed yet, okay? But level 5 automation is where we go next. That's where it gets very interesting. Level 5 automation is where you hop in the car, plug in your destination and go to sleep and turn up at your destination. Now, if that sounds inconceivable, check out this imagery released by Volvo in September last year of a concept car they're working on right now. Who wants one of these cars immediately? Anyone love the idea of a car you can just have a sleep in, okay? But this is where we're heading. Now, to give you a sense of where this technology is up to, this is a video from a trial that was run for most of last year by Waymo over in Phoenix, Arizona, Waymo being Google's driverless car spin-off. They began selling these to the public in mid-December last year. And so just have a think of what it's like to be in one of these cars where no one's behind the wheel. AI is driving the car. I mean, imagine viscerally what that feels like. But more importantly, imagine how disruptive this one application of AI is going to be for a whole stack of industries in the years ahead. For instance, you think about how this will disrupt the game for auto insurers. Now, I work with insurers. They're my clients. I want to tell you, behind closed doors, they're getting nervous about this stuff here. Like, we're talking sphincter tightening nervousness, okay, about this stuff here, right? Because have a think about it. If you have an accident in a driverless car, who's at fault? Who makes a claim on their insurance? The whole basis of that industry falls apart the moment the person behind the wheel isn't in control of that car. And that's the insurance game. You think about the impact of this on the paid parking industry. Equally significant. I mean, who's paid to park their car somewhere in the last week? Parking stations, parking meters. Hands up. Keep your hands up if you've enjoyed the experience. Anyone enjoy it? None of us. Now, we have no choice but to do this right now. Here's the reality. Within 15 years, there's every chance none of us in this room will pay to park our cars anywhere, ever again. Why? Because if you live semi-local to where we are here this afternoon, your driverless car may well drop you out on Sussex Street. You come into the conference and your car may well take off and go home. Come back and pick you up this afternoon. Or more likely, because that would be dumb in that it puts a whole lot of empty cars on the road, more likely your driverless car would drop you here while you're at the conference today. Your car goes into a pool of other driverless vehicles, Uber style, earning you cash, ferrying other people around while you're sitting here at the conference. Or hey, what about this? Take it a step further. If within 20 years there are tens of thousands of Uber style driverless cars on the road, why would you bother owning a car in the first place? And this is the question that is consuming the mentality and the mindset of a whole lot of car makers. This is why I think Maserati are in a good spot. Here's following my logic. The reality is, and I read this prediction recently, within 30 years, owning a car will be like owning a horse today. We may well get to a point where personal car ownership is because it's a passion or a hobby. Now, it is far more easier to get excited about that than the Toyota Camry, for instance. And so what we'll see is quite likely we get to a point where having a car is something that is a lifestyle choice. And in the same way we would see having a horse right now in the country, you go and ride regularly because it's something you love to do. And this is called mobility as a service. Read up on it. We're seeing many of the big car makers already moving toward this. Ford and Toyota in the last 12 months. In fact, Ford have wound back all bar, I think, 4 of their sedan models. They culled a whole stack of their middle management late last year, all about diverting funds and resources to autonomous vehicles to sell to ride-sharing services, not the public. This is a seismic shift we're about to see. Now, you think about this from a practical or personal perspective. So I look at my little boy. I've got a little boy named Max. Max is 3. This is Max up on the screen here. His favourite thing to do right now is when we get home and pull in the driveway, to jump on my lap and pretend to drive the car. Loves it. And I watched him doing this a few months ago, and I thought, there's every chance he may never get to do it. He may never get a driver's license. So you get your head around just the practical implications of just one form of AI. Now, that's the technology stuff. We've heard a lot about it today. I don't want to dwell on it anymore. That's just the first form of disruption we'll see play out in a whole stack of industries. And by the way, in some surprising ones, like the legal sector. I mean, the legal sector is interesting. Deloitte's prediction by 2027, 39% of current legal sector jobs may evaporate entirely. And I was working with a bunch of law firm partners in Hong Kong late last year. It was interesting. I don't know if you've noticed, just sometimes there's just the faintest whiff, just a whiff of arrogance in the legal profession, just a whiff. And so we're talking about how AI could take the jobs, and you could just see these law firm partners, arms folded, oh, no, we're highly functioning humans, no robot could do what we do. And to some extent that's true. We're going to see a lot of the discovery and the research functions, and that's already happening, taken over by bots, which of course then means for lawyers and accountants and a whole lot of professional services, it's the uniquely human stuff we do that'll count. So again, we could talk a lot more about this stuff. Let's look at the second form of disruption we'll see play out. Number 2, this is one that gets nowhere near enough airplay in my opinion when it comes to identifying threats. And that is going to be the disruption related to unconventional competitors. Now I reckon when we think about this whole idea as leaders of how do we get our heads around what's coming next, what is that bigger picture, going to the theme of today, I reckon when we look to identify threats and disruptions, I reckon there's a lot we can learn from the annals of history, particularly the history books in wartime situations. Military history is fascinating. And I was interested in Singapore a little while ago. I was doing some research while I was over there for a conference on the fall of Singapore during World War II. What I discovered is a lot of what I was taught at school about the fall of Singapore during World War II wasn't super accurate. A lot of what I was taught was basically the British were caught unprepared by the Japanese when they invaded. And when I got over there and started doing some research, I figured out that was very untrue. That's like fake news, okay? Because the British were hyper ready. The problem was they were ready in the wrong way. And the established paradigm at the time was this: if you're going to take an island nation like Singapore, you'll arrive from the ocean on big ships. So the British, of course, had heavily fortified the entire east coast of Singapore, ready for the threat to emerge. And while their troops were massed on the shoreline waiting for the threat to emerge, sipping their tea, crossing their right shoulder across the Johor Strait came the Japanese. A way that all the experts said could not be done, was not practical, was not possible, and it wasn't until a shift occurred. That shift was the Japanese invented collapsible bicycles and collapsible boats to make it possible. They, of course, took Singapore so quickly when news got back to Imperial Command, they almost didn't believe it. And can I suggest this is the dynamic that is going to unfold in every single industry in the next 5 to 10 years. And it already is. So the competitor we need to look out for is not the established landscape, the people we've been competing with for the last 5 years. It is people coming into our industry that have got no business being there, that have never been competitors, they've never been in our sector, but they'll emerge in ways we're not looking for. And if we don't have our antennas up, we could miss it. Now, the encouragement I give to clients is this: if you want to understand disruption in your sector, don't reach for the long-range lens, the telescope, to see what's coming 5, 10, 15 years out in a linear fashion. Pop telescope down. Reach for the wide-angle lens. Because you know where disruption will come from? The periphery, left and right field, in ways you're not expecting. Now, a good example of this, I was working with a bunch of optometrists recently, and I said, there's a bunch of optometrists, and these are all the independent guys. I said, what are the biggest disruptors facing you as a sector? And these guys, all these independents, said, well, for us, the biggest disruption is OPSM and Specsavers at the big end of town, all the big chain stores. But then also we've got to deal with the fact that we've got, the Bailey Nelsons of the world at the boutique end. And I said, oh, that's all well and good. That's definitely true. I said, but how many of you are aware of a technology called Opternative? 3 out of the 250 in the room that day put their hands up. And so I went on to describe how this works. Check out the screens. Opternative, and this is operating in 13 US states right now, it's coming here in the next 18 months quite likely, allows you to use a camera in your smartphone, your tablet device, your laptop to do a full eye examination from home. That eye examination is submitted, a trained technician with the benefit of AI does a diagnostic, sends it back to you within 24 to 48 hours. You then jump online, order your frames or lenses from wherever works for you, and they get posted to your front door 3 days later, with no need to go anywhere near your local optometrist. And you've got a whole industry right now so fixated on OPSM and Specsavers and Bailey Nelson, they're missing what's crossing the Johor Strait. Now, what's the equivalent for you in your sector? What's the unconventional threat? And we'll come back to that theme in a couple of moments. Okay, number 3, the third form of disruption we'll take is in the form of the empowered marketplace. The fact is, our consumers, our marketplace has more information, more options, more paths to market than ever, which gives them power. But the big thing they're increasingly getting, and it's going to be the game changer to watch, is your marketplace, your consumers have a voice they've never had before. Now, this has been steadily growing over the last decade, but there was one pivotal day where businesses around the world suddenly realised the game had changed and the customer voice could not be ignored. That date was April 10th, 2017. And the business that learned the hard way just how loud a consumer's voice could be was an airline in the US beginning with the letter U, okay? Now, some of you may remember that day because in the news you saw footage and images like this. How many of you were as shocked as I was when you saw the footage of this guy getting booted off this flight and blood streaming down his face? Now, what's interesting is this sort of stuff goes on in America, all the time, but it happens. They overbook flights all the time. I don't think other airlines are as good at beating their passengers up as United clearly are. Okay, but this stuff goes on. What was different this time was 2 words. Facebook Live. 3 weeks before this moment had occurred, Facebook Live went live. And now what happened is, as this scene happened, people sitting nearby got their phones out. They didn't just take a photo, they didn't just video the thing, they actually broadcast it live to the world. Within a few hours, United's share price had tanked. Within a day, there was a call for the CEO's scalp. And this took some really interesting twists and turns when it got into the social media space, particularly with some of the memes that popped up. Memes like this one here, I love this one. We put the word hospital in hospitality, just gold. My favourite one, though, is this one here, the new cabin class on United flights. I thought, who comes up with this stuff? But one of the best things we saw was one of their competitors get in on the action too. So Southwest launched this campaign within 24 hours. It was gold, okay? But we see these examples where now the marketplace, they've got the power and we can't ignore it. And it's only going to increase. Now, to bring this down to a hyper-local level, I was at our local Coles a little while back, and I don't know how many of you know Coles Lane Cove. Anyone know Lane Cove Coles? Anyone familiar with that? So that's our local one. It's a shocker. I often describe it as a supermarket in need of a good fire because it's just like so run down. They're about to knock it down, I do believe. This was the state of every block of cheese on display at Coles Lane Cove the day I went down the refrigerated aisle. Covered in mould, the whole lot. Now, I took a photo of this thinking, it could be a good case study. What I didn't then do is put it on Instagram or Facebook. But I could have, and many do. And these are, of course, the moments of truth for any business, any brand today. And it's not just social media, it's the myriad review sites that are out there. And the challenge for all of us as leaders and in our organisations is how do we keep abreast of what the empowered marketplace is saying so we can respond? And hey, so we can learn from it. Great tool I would highly recommend to you, and there are others like it, but one like Mention.com is quite good. Mention.com allows you to get an alert every time your company name or a product name is mentioned on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, any of the social platforms, you get an alert. There are others like this. The beauty is when you get talked about, you can respond. The question, of course, is how to respond. Here's one way not to respond when the marketplace uses this very powerful voice they've got. I love this example from a couple of years back. A hotel over in the UK, the Broadway Hotel, had some people stay at the hotel, had a pretty rubbish experience. After they checked out, they went on to TripAdvisor and wrote a scathing, it was actually quite a mean review about the Broadway Hotel. And a few days later, about 4 days later, they noticed a £100 charge from the Broadway Hotel on their credit card. They thought it was a mistake. So they rang the hotel to query the charge and ask for a refund. To get this, they speak to the manager on duty, who did not miss a beat. And he said, oh yes, well, I don't know if you read the fine print when you checked in, but we have a company policy of charging £100 for all negative reviews on TripAdvisor. And then tried to enforce it, okay? Now, what does this represent? It represents a dated paradigm. That paradigm is, hey, we're the business. We control our brand. You're just the customer. That used to be true. It no longer is. And we'll come back to that theme in a couple of moments. Number 4, fourth and final form disruption is going to take is in the form of generational change. And I love what Claire shared before. And if you didn't get a copy of her book, I'd highly recommend it. I even wrote a little endorsement in the front of the book because I think her work is so good. But this is a space that she and I and Mark McCrindle and Bernard Salt, there's about 8 of us that have been in this space for a lot of years looking at how generations are changing, like what's coming down the line, and how can we not ignore this? Because, I mean, the group that I started looking at back in 2004 with some real specific focus was one group who at the time were changing the game and have continued to. And that's that group that Claire mentioned in passing, a group called Generation Y, or the Millennials as a cohort. And I first started looking at this group back in 2004 because that's the year that we saw headlines like these ones flash across newspapers around the world. Remember Corey Worthington, all his mates, that party they had? And there was so much negative press about millennials and Gen Y. I remember thinking, as a millennial myself, is this true? Are we really that bad? And all the Gen Xers say, yes, basically you are. Okay, because there's often a lot of friction between X and Y. Biggest generation gap you'll see in your teams. And so I actually spent the next 3.5 years interviewing 80,000 Gen Ys or millennials to try and get a sense of what's actually making this group tick. And the years since then, a lot of my time has been spent with businesses trying to help them understand that millennial cohort, whereas Claire does the Gen Z stuff, that's her focus. Mine is still around how do you understand that group of consumers and the workforce? Because we can't ignore them. Now, I was working with Procter & Gamble's leadership a few months ago and learned that they learned this the hard way, just how you can't afford to ignore millennials. And where they learned this was with one of their product lines in the US. So fabric softeners, of course, are a big product line, but the Downy brand, which is one of Procter & Gamble's flagship brands, is the market-leading brand of fabric softener in the US. Problem was, between 2007 and 2015, they lost 26% in sales. Didn't lose it to other brands, the whole sector constricted. When they looked at why this was, why were the sales of fabric softeners going backwards, they figured out very quickly it was because millennials were not buying fabric softener. Why? Because they actually don't know what it's for. They don't know why you would buy it. See, this product was developed at a time when water was harder and washing machines weren't that good. And the idea was we had to put this in to make sure our clothes didn't get scratchy. And then, of course, we bought that and then got into a habit of always using it. And so older consumers still buy this stuff because they always have. Whereas millennials who've entered life when water is softer, washing machines are better, and in a time where we wear activewear that says on the label, do not use fabric softener, have come into adult life and said, why would I buy this stuff? And so to address this, you'll love this, to address this, Procter & Gamble rebadged this product. It's only a simple rebadge, but instead of calling it fabric softener, it is now called fabric conditioner. Check it out, local supermarket, that's what it's now called. And that one change caused a 6% jump in sales over the next year, driven predominantly by millennials. Because they all thought, well, I mean, I can only assume this is the way it works. They know what conditioner does to their hair, and so, hey, why wouldn't I get it for my clothes too? Okay, this was the idea. Now, why would a company like Procter & Gamble spend so much cash on millennials? Here's why. Check out some of the data. It's pretty compelling. They control 35 to 45% of discretionary spending power. They're cashed up. Any guesses why they're so cashed up, by the way? Because they're still living at home in many cases. I was chatting with Jeff before from USANA. Your daughter's just moved back again. So they sort of cycle out and back a few times generally. Okay, what about this one here? 54% of the stuff they buy online. Far more of it they research online before they actually make a purchase in store. But this is the kicker. 78% would rather spend money on experiences than physical items. Now the sweet spot is when you can get a physical item that comes with an experience. That's the gold with millennials. Now, before we move off this group as a cohort, it's good to look at this whole notion of how do we communicate across the generation gap as brands as well, because some very interesting research was done by Dimension Data a little while back, looking at how different generations want brands to connect with them. And this little graph up here is pretty important. It tells a very compelling story. And I think the most important data is this stuff here. When it comes to millennials, how do they want you to communicate with them? Do not call them. In fact, if you've got teenage or 20-something-year-old kids, you probably know, don't even try to call your kids. They won't answer. In fact, you call them, they'll text you back and say, what'd you call for? Is everything all right? And you'd be like, well, if you answered the phone, you'd know, okay? But you text and they'll get straight back to you, okay? So text messages, but certainly social media, that is where they hang out. Very different for baby boomers. Now, before we move off this theme, it's important to also discuss the fact that when it comes to millennials as staff, they're interesting, and it picks up on some of the things that Claire shared. I don't know how many of you have noticed that the challenge with millennials, even though they bring a lot of great stuff into the workplace, one of the biggest frustrations I'm hearing from corporate leaders weekly is just this sense that millennials can be just a bit high maintenance at times. I don't know if you've ever picked up on that, this idea that they seem to always need to be thanked or praised for everything they do. Like they come into work in the morning and there's almost an expectation the boss will say, oh my goodness, thank you for being here today. We're so grateful you've arrived. And employers will say, what the heck, I pay you to be here. Why do I have to thank you as well? And you do. In fact, a study done a few years ago asked millennials, how often do you want praise from your boss? Are you ready for this? 60% said once a day will be really good if that's cool. 35% said 2 to 3 times a day will be even better if that's all right. And some of you are like, are you serious? Once a year at the Christmas party is plenty. Shut up and do your job, okay? Now, of course, why is this the case? Well, hey, this is a generation who've grown up in an era where every runner in the race gets a ribbon. I call this communism on the sports field because that's sort of what it is, okay? I remember speaking with a teacher a number of years ago in a school who said in their school they can no longer even use the word fail ever. When a student hasn't made the grade, that they're now instructed to use the term deferred success because that is seen as better for self-esteem. So you can see managing and leading this group, even though they bring a lot of great stuff with them, there are some challenges there too. So of those 4 forms of disruption, I wonder from your perspective, which one do you think is going to be the biggest game changer in your context? Is it going to be the impact of automation, AI, robotics, all the stuff we've heard about at a few different points today? Is it going to be those unconventional competitors, an empowered marketplace, or the generational demographic piece? So I want to give you just 30 seconds in table groups. Which of these 4 is going to be the biggest one for you and in what way? Go for it. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, straw poll. Let's have a bit of a show of hands. Hands up if you think number 1 is going to be the most significant disruption for you, the impact of automation, AI, robotics, some of the stuff we've already talked about today. Hands up. Quite a number of you. What about unconventional competitors? Who thinks that's going to be a key one? I agree. I do agree. Okay, what about the empowered marketplace? Yep, quite a few hands there. What about the demographic changes? All right. Who finds all 4 moderately terrifying? Who's in that position? I mean, this is the stuff that's coming. Now, we could spend a whole stack more time, I guess, going deep, looking at some of the trends that are coming. I mean, that's a very short overview of what the next sort of 5 or 10 years will look like. If it would be useful, something we did late last year was put a report together looking at the top 8 sort of mega trends that will shape the next decade or so. And it's quite a comprehensive sort of deal. It's about 40 pages, goes really deep looking at some of the data and some of the examples we talked about there, but a whole lot of others we haven't had time to get to. If you want to get a copy of that report, best way to do so, and you can do it obviously electronically, is the easiest way. So if you go to my website, I'll leave this open for the rest of tonight if you want to do it later. So the website's michaelmcqueen.net. If you jump on there, on the homepage, you'll see a little blue button that says conference code. If you click on that blue button, I think it asks for your name, the best email address for us to send the report to, and you'll need a code to activate it. The code for this event is TRENDS, TRENDS. And that'll send a little link to you so you can download that report. So feel free to have a look at that because there's a lot more in there just in terms of like what's the next 5 and 10 years going to hold. Now let's spend the remainder of our time though looking at this question of how do we prepare for this stuff? How do we gear up and make sure we're not caught off guard by the trends that are about to hit? And even more than that, how can we emerge from turbulent times stronger as a result of not just sort of clinging on for dear life? And to that end, I'd really highly recommend to you a piece of research that's released each year, and it's some research that a team do in conjunction with PwC called the Future Brand Index. And every year, it's been run for 4 years. This team of researchers get together and look at, of the top 100 brands on the PwC list, which are the ones that are most ready for change, have cultures, mindsets, brand positionings that mean they're ready for the disruptions about to hit. And if you look at that list, the Future Brand Index from the last 6 months that was released, these are the categories of brands in descending order from those in the top category that are most prepared, middle category moderately, and those in the bottom are the ones that need to give some close attention to the stuff that's coming. And when I looked at this list, I mean, the reality is I've worked with a number of these brands and got a chance to see under the hood, what are they doing? What's the culture they've got, the mindsets they have? And I guess what can we learn from these brands that are fit for the future? And I want to just, pull out some principles from what they're doing and suggest that there are 4 things that every brand or business will need to do if you're going to be ready for the stuff that's about to hit. And we've only got about 20 minutes to go, so we're going to move really fast. So if you've got something to jot some notes down with, again, grab it out because we'll move pretty quick here. These are 4 things that every one of these brands and businesses are doing daily. Okay, and the first is this. We need to have a willingness, an eagerness to dig the well before you get thirsty. What I mean by this is you need to be reinventing yourself constantly before disruption leaves you with no other choice. Because if you wait until some of these changes hit before you move, it's too late. At that point, you're in survival mode, not strategic mode. I was doing some work with Toyota last year and learned that one of the enduring ethoses in the Toyota business, and to their credit, they're doing this relatively well right now, is an ethos that comes from one of their former global chairmen, a guy named Hiroshi Okuda, who was famous for saying this. He said, the best time to reform business is when business is good. Profit margins are healthy, market shares looking great. When things are just ticking along nicely, that is the time to start reinventing yourself. Now, let's be honest, while it might be the best time to reform your business when business is good, it is also the hardest time because, of course, there's no existential threat. The platform's not on fire. If it's not broken, don't try and fix it, particularly when shareholders are watching carefully. And yet that is the very mentality that will leave you most vulnerable to being disrupted. And there's some great examples of brands that have done this beautifully over the years. One of my favorites is the brand connected with this product here. Anyone know this brand up on the screen connected with this product? Just yell it out if you know. Corning. So Corning, brilliant. They're 180 years old, I think, this year. What I love about Corning, if you look at their track record as a brand, so going back 100 and something years, early 1900s, most of their revenue came from producing glass light globes. They were one of the biggest and the best at doing this. They actually provided the glass to Edison to create the electric filament light. The problem was they could see change was coming. There were clouds gathering on the horizon. As more and more competitors came into that space, product would become commoditized, profit margins squeezed. They realized they couldn't stay there. So while they were still making great money from light globes, they essentially walked away from that business. And that's when they went into businesses like the cook and kitchenware market. Now, most of us still think of Corning today as this stuff in our kitchens at home. What you might not know is one of their key business areas today has nothing to do with this at all. In fact, one of their key markets, you've got a few, fibre optics, for instance, Gorilla Glass on your phones, your smartphones made by Corning. One of the key ones, though, for them is the medical device market. For instance, this is a diagnostics board being used in surgical wards right now around the world made using Corning glass. I was working with Medtronic last year, the big medical device company, and they were telling me one of their products is a capsule you can swallow that goes throughout your body taking video footage. And at the end of the process, I guess it comes out the other end, someone hoses it off and they download the footage somehow. And they're telling me, though, the tiny lenses in these capsules are actually made by Corning, using the same formula for glass making they've used for over a century. This is a great example of taking what you're good at and repurposing it, repositioning it. 3 questions you need to ask yourself before you do this. What do we know? What do we own? What can we do? What are the unique assets we've got that we need to use in a completely different way, a different application? We could look at a whole pile of examples of brands that have done this. But I'm guessing many of you probably heard this quote on the screen here. Einstein was famous for saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get a different result. It's almost a cliche these days. I'm guessing most of you have heard that. Here's the thing. Can I put it to you that if Einstein was defining insanity today, in 2019, in light of all the changes we're seeing, I reckon I have a hunch he would actually define insanity today the opposite way. I reckon he'd say that insanity today is actually doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get the same result. What I mean by that is this. If your back-end systems and processes and approaches are the same today as they were 3 years ago or 5 years ago, and you're expecting them to get the same results they were getting 3 years or 5 years ago, you're going to be sorely mistaken. I mean, the pace of change just means no matter how good your success formula is, we can never sit on it for too long. I love this insight from the former head of GE, Jack Welch. I wonder what he'd say of GE these days. Jack Welch said this: the moment the rate of change outside an organisation exceeds the rate of change in it, the end is not far away. And that's a great reminder for any of us in the room here this afternoon. So that's the first key. If we're going to be ready for the stuff that's about to hit, we need to be willing to, eager to dig the well before we get thirsty. Number two, second key, if you're going to be ready for disruption, and I love this one, you need to think revolution, not evolution. Now, most of us think of innovation as an evolutionary process, continual process improvement. Let's do what we did last year, a bit cheaper, a bit faster, a bit more efficiently. And there's a place for that by all means. But can I suggest, if that's all you're doing in your organisation, that ain't going to cut it. It's just not going to be enough. I love this insight from the former head of the business faculty at San Francisco University. Oren Harari said this, I love this. He said, remember, the electric light never came from the continuous improvement of candles. Isn't that great? And it's so true. Didn't matter how good you got at making candles, there came a point where a fundamental rethink in how we made light needed to occur. And that's the point where a whole stack of industries are right now. Now, let's not gloss over this and say this is easy. It's not easy. This means often thinking about your revenue models, your approach to market in a completely different way. That is unsettling, that is confronting, that is risky. And yet it's necessary. You look at how even the best struggle to do this. I was working with APRA and AMCOS yesterday and talking to them about what's happening in the music industry right now. It was really interesting hearing the story of what happened when Spotify first entered the market here in Australia. Because even the great innovator Apple struggled to think in a revolutionary way when the game changed. When Spotify and Pandora launched, Apple didn't respond for almost 2 years. Why? Because their mentality was so fixed in this idea that we, you and I, should have to own the music we enjoy. Even if it's just one song, not the whole album, just one song, we've still got to buy that one song. And then Spotify came out and said, no, don't own the asset, don't own the song, just pay us a monthly fee and listen to whatever you like. This was such a shift for iTunes, such a shift for Apple. It took them 2 years essentially to make the shift. By the time they did and launched Apple Music, they were in a significant catch-up game. And they've caught up now, but it was a big challenge there. One of only a few significant strategic missteps over the last 20 years for Apple because of the challenge to think in a revolutionary way. Now, one of the things you'll find in your booklets out there, I know your booklets, your bags when you head out, I put this in because I thought it might be useful. We put this together a little while ago, which is basically a series of questions to, when you're in a position where you feel like you're just stuck in that evolutionary mode, how do you jolt the thinking of a team or an organisation? So there's a series of questions on there to do that. And the reason I put it down as a list of questions, I thought this insight from Thomas Berger was interesting. He said, the art and science of asking questions is the source of all good ideas. If you and your team are going to embrace a revolutionary approach, it's the questions that will often kickstart that whole process. So have a look at that in your bags. Hopefully that's useful to start some of that. Actually on the back too, if you want to have a look, there's a little questionnaire that'll tell you, little tool that'll tell you how vulnerable to being disrupted you are. Get a score right now. That could be terrifying or encouraging depending on how you go as the result. But check that out in terms of questions that can spark this revolutionary thinking. All right, number three. Third key if we're going to be ready for disruption. This goes to what Lisa shared in her session, Lisa from Atlassian. You need to focus on friction. Now, what's friction? Friction's the stuff that makes it difficult for your customers to do business with you. It's that user experience stuff she talked about. Now, here's the key message. The friction, and by friction I mean things like complexity, bureaucracy, red tape, the stuff that irritates our customers, the friction you are unwilling to address is the very stuff that'll leave you vulnerable to being disrupted in the coming years. Because someone else will come into the marketplace, probably a tech startup, will come in and go, well, we'll make it easy for customers, and then you're left in catch-up mode. Great example of this is this company here. Who's heard of TransferWise before, just out of curiosity? Who's familiar with them? Only a few. If you don't know them, check them out. If you've ever got to transfer money across international borders, don't go to a bank. Go here. They're the best place I've found yet for transferring cash. It'll be a heap cheaper, better exchange rate, and it'll happen pretty much almost instantaneously. Not quite, but almost instantaneously. But what's really interesting about TransferWise as a company is the genesis story of this company. So this company was actually started by two of the guys who were employee 2 and employee 3 at Skype. And years back, they were posted from Skype's head office in Estonia to the UK to open up the UK market. When they landed in London, they encountered the frustration that every expat employee has ever experienced, which is how do I get my pay packet transferred from where I used to work and live to where I'm now working and living? Every month, They'd have to either ring their bank in Estonia or send a faxed authorisation form for the wire transfer. It took days for the cash to turn up, cost a fortune in fees. And a few months in, they're asking themselves the question, why is it so hard to transfer money from one country to another? What is the deal with that? Who's ever asked themselves that question? I know I have many, many, many times. So they go the next step and think, well, okay, if we were to try and build something to solve that, what would it look like? This was the answer to that question. So TransferWise, to put it very simply, is a peer-to-peer cloud-based platform. If I've got, let's say, Aussie dollars, you've got British pounds, I want pounds, you want dollars, we essentially swap them in real time. And this has become such a massive disruptor. I was working with one of the banks recently, and at the lunch break, I was chatting to the guy who heads up currency exchange for that bank, and he said, this has changed the game so much. He said, we're actually thinking about getting out of currency exchange as part of our business in the next year. He said, because we just can't compete with TransferWise anymore. Now, here's a question I would pose to you. Why didn't the banks build their own equivalent of TransferWise, do you reckon? They were making a fortune from friction. The stuff that made our lives difficult and irritating was actually working in their favour. And this is the challenge, by the way. It's easy to slam the banks, particularly in the week we've had the Royal Commission report, but apply this to yourself. What are the things that make it difficult for your customers, but it's easy to go, hey, everyone in the industry does it. It's just the way it is. I'd love it to be better if it could, but it just can't be because of regulation and all the rest of it. We often just go, no, I can't solve that problem. It's just the way it is. Until someone comes in and solves that problem for the customer, and then you as the incumbent are in catch-up mode. And I love the word that Lisa talked about before, and I think it is so true. One of the most important skills in innovation is not creativity or lateral thinking. It's that word beginning with E. It's empathy. How do you step into your customer's shoes? What is it like to do business with you from their perspective? What are the things that cause irritation and frustration? And Michael talked about this from a Telstra perspective this morning. Go to the pain points. Because if you can innovate to solve that stuff, that's some of the most important stuff. The user experience in an age of empowered consumers matters more than ever before. All right, let's keep going. Number 4, fourth and final key if we're going to be ready for disruption is this. We need to foster healthy paranoia. Andy Grove, of course, of Intel fame, put it well when he said that only the paranoid survive. And it's true. Because here's the beauty of paranoia. Healthy paranoia tends to engender the two most important postures if you're going to be agile. And they both start with H. If you want to write both these words down, healthy paranoia will keep you humble and it'll keep you hungry. And of course, what's the opposite of humble and hungry? Arrogant and complacent. Now, we don't call it arrogance, by the way. We call it experience or certainty, and yet they're often the same thing. Now, the old saying is true. The moment you think you've made it, you've passed it. We can never get to a point where we feel like we've arrived at the winning formula. And the beauty of operating with that sense that you've got a target painted on your back, there are others out to get you, it keeps you humble and hungry. What's next? The next challenge, the next opportunity? How do we need to rethink things? And there's some great examples of brands that have done this. One of my favourites, and it might surprise you that this is a good brand as an example of healthy paranoia because of some of their other various missteps over the last 18 months, is the example of Facebook. Facebook as a business has kept healthy paranoia at the core of the company. Now, a few years back, Facebook passed a very significant milestone in terms of daily active users, and they had a massive party to celebrate that, but more than that, they did something surprising. For a digital company, what they did that was surprising is they distributed this little red book to every employee at Facebook HQ. Now, for many months, we didn't know the contents of this book. It was a closely guarded secret. All we knew is that this book contained the values, the principles, the DNA that had made Facebook successful. The idea being, lots of the new staff weren't around in the early days. They hadn't caught that DNA by osmosis. Now, a few months after this book was distributed, I managed to get a copy of what was inside, and my favourite page by far is this one here. If we don't create the thing that kills Facebook, someone else will. That is like a dictionary definition right there of healthy paranoia. Can you imagine not just you, but everyone in your team, particularly your leadership team, your direct reports, imagine if they went into work every day with the mentality that today, if I don't do something that helps kill our business, someone else will. That's a confronting notion, but it's such a necessary mindset to have if you're going to be ready for disruption. I love this too because it reminds us of one of Steve Jobs' most famous quotes. And Steve Jobs said, if you're not willing to cannibalize your own business, someone else will do it for you. And they will never do it with your best interests in mind. And the challenge, of course, is when some of those unconventional competitive threats emerge, we cannot fall into the trap of dismissing, ignoring, or ridiculing them. It's so often what we do. It'll never happen, it'll never catch on, and by the time it does, or if it's too late for us to respond. Healthy paranoia keeps you aware of some of those threats when they're still in a position for you to do something about them. All right, what we'll do before we finish up, we're almost out of time. What I will do, though, is I'll pop my details up on the screen. Feel free to check out the website, a whole pile of things that might be useful up there, blog posts, video posts, there's a whole video channel on our site, in fact, that just short clips are built on some of the things we've talked about in this session this afternoon. I know a number of you, the members, will get a copy of this book if you come out and give me a card of some sort. I think you've got like little cards for books or something like that. So I'll just be out here if you wanted to get one of these signed. There's obviously a stack more in here that we didn't get to this afternoon in terms of some of the strategies, what other organisations are doing. So hopefully that will be of use for those of you who get a copy of that this afternoon. But otherwise, check out the website, a whole pile of things that might be useful up there. But just as we draw all this together, we've covered a lot of ground in this fairly brief session this afternoon. But as we draw this together, I wanted to leave you with one quote this afternoon that I think is one of my favourites at the moment. What I love about this quote, it's been my favourite probably for the last 12 or 18 months, is that it's a quote that's actually 2,600 years old. But I reckon it's more relevant now than ever before. And it's a quote from the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who said this: resisting change is a little bit like trying to hold your breath. Even if you are successful, it's not going to end well, okay? And that'd be my simple encouragement. In fact, as a summary of so much of what we've talked about today, right from the very beginning of the day, some of this stuff is confronting. And there is that sort of urge to go, it's all too much, I'll just sort of ignore it, hope it goes away. We don't do that consciously, but unconsciously we can do that. We can't fight these changes. All we can really do is adapt in the face of them. So again, thanks for the invite. I hope that was useful. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Let me ask you one quick question. Wonderful stuff, mate. Let me ask you just a couple of very quick questions. We are really pushed up on time, so I won't go to the audience, but I'll ask a couple of quick ones that might, if that's all right. One of the things we heard about earlier today from Paul Bloxham, the resource future and that sort of stuff, energy, renewable energy, and that as a disruptor. When you talk to organisations, are they ahead of the political discussion on that? Are some of them still spooked and scared? Because some of the pro-renewable energy people will say, look, in 5 years you just won't recognise the space. We're this close to a revolution. Others are going, coal is still going to do the business for the next 50 years. You're kidding yourself if it's not going to. What's your feel on where all that's at and the potential implications?
So if you look at here versus the US, so we're ahead of a whole lot of other markets. We're not ahead of a lot of Europe right now, but we're ahead of the US and Australia in some areas. So I was speaking at a big forum in South Carolina last year for all the utility sector over there, and the discussions they're having right now are about 2 years behind where we're at. I was speaking at a forum just early January this year for Downer, for all of the utilities mob here in Australia. And I was really encouraged by the thinking happening in that room around the infrastructure for renewables. I mean, for a lot of them, there's no doubt about it, it's been a big threat they've had to deal with. But the reality is the economic benefits of doing this, apart from any moral imperatives, the economic benefits are now stacking up. And you look at some of the interesting things coming online in that renewable space that mean that the game will be very different. So you look at things like translucent PVs, so translucent solar panels, which could mean every one of the windows in this hotel and every building around here could well be generating power within 5 years. This is not just panels on the roof. This solves a big equity issue for people living in apartments that don't have roofs, like typical homes in suburbia, to be able to generate their own power. You look at, actually one to really check out that's quite interesting is a nuclear fusion plant right now that they're testing in southern France called the ITER, I-T-E-R. It's about 2/3 finished. You've had 35 countries pitch in $25 billion to create this. And we are that close to nuclear fusion becoming something that could actually be scalable and feasible. And that could be a significant game changer. So there's some really interesting stuff happening. We saw legislation come through in California, October last year for net zero homes to be mandatory by 2020. In other words, every new home built must produce as much power as it consumes. Europe's going to be 2030 for that. So the wheels are turning. It's going to be a very, very interesting space to watch, but we're in a relatively good spot here.
And you talked about one of those disruptors on your list of ones you don't hear spoken about enough, The one I never hear spoken about, the complete game changer I see coming that I don't understand, people don't talk about much, is that sometime 5 to 10 years from now, you've already got it. You've already got language translation at very high effective in really cutting edge, expensive.
Yep.
5 to 10 years from now, you will just talk into your phone and the person in the other end will hear you in Icelandic.
Yep.
And they will talk back in Icelandic and you will hear them in English. And when that comes, and when we have a genuine universal lingua franca, and even let's say it's 15 years, the idea that there will not be a language barrier on Earth, certainly within our lifetime, probably within a decade. The potential for that, but also the expectation that you would be able to work with anyone else in the world. I never hear anyone talking about that, and I can't see a bigger game changer coming.
Yeah, so translate one-to-one is the interesting one in this space. So translate, so if you look at it, translate ONE, number 2, ONE. And that's probably the biggest one that's on the market in the last 12 months. And these are these little earpieces you can wear, and let's say you're in Germany, you speak in English, they'll hear you in German, they respond in German, you hear in English. And the technology is far closer than most of us realise, which is interesting, by the way, for education, because even when we had our little boy, we're like, oh, do we get him into Mandarin lessons, or and we thought, well, actually, it probably won't matter, realistically. The challenge, of course, being translation only translates literally, doesn't translate context. So suddenly we'll be in a position where you may be able to understand what the other person has said, but what did they actually mean? And so cross-cultural understanding will probably become more important in the next few years. But certainly the language barrier is about to fall, and it'll be great for all us Aussies who are useless at other languages. It'll be fantastic. I love
Ruth Cobber, it will be. How to prepare now for what's next. The books. Give him a round of applause, Michael McQueen. Yes, well done. I'm sure you can see why Michael was recently voted into the Australian Professional Speakers Hall of Fame. And let me just say, you don't stand in the queue at nightclubs anymore once you've been an expression of that. Come straight to the front, sir. We're going to go to the quiz answers first, or the winner's slide. You just bring up the next slide you've got there, my friend. I didn't bother to check with you what it was. Which country had an entirely white flag for a 16-year period? Now, Afghanistan did have it for a handful of months around the Taliban time early on, but no, it was France during the Bourbon Restoration, an entirely white flag from 1814 to 1830. If you tweeted France, you won a prize. Second question was, 81-year-old Aussie, an amazing guy, this guy. For 60 years, James Harrison had donated blood once a fortnight. He had an incredibly rare compound in his blood that was the cure for a birth defect called HDN. Depending how you count it, he might have saved more than 1 million lives. Every compound to fight HDN in Australia in the last 60 years has had a little bit of his blood in it. Love it. Question number 3. This was very difficult until someone got so excited when they got it, they shouted it out really loud. It's not 5. The only number that goes entirely in alphabetical order forward in English, strictly, we did have a couple of internationals, is 40, F-O-R-T-Y. And one day when you've got a bit of spare time on your hands, hop online and read the answer to this next question about the 57 Whitsunday sins. It's just awesome, including calling Adultery Rose a jade. It was done by the brilliant, but very, very religious and slightly erratic Sir Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton there wrote his 57 sins. So if your name appears on this list, your name or your Twitter handle, pop outside and see me afterwards. I've got a copy of my book that I will sign for you. And I thought I'd impress you all as CEOs with my own entrepreneurial spirit. I've accidentally brought some extra books. So if you missed out and you'd like to buy one off me, come and see me outside as well. Inspirational entrepreneurial spirit there, Adam. Okay, to wrap it all up, Syndicate Chairman Tasso Papachakis. Give Tasso a big round of applause. Come up here, Tasso, let's do this.
Well, one word, and one word that explains all this. Wow, how much have we got to contend with as leaders of our businesses going forward? I'd like to thank Adam Spencer. Adam, got a little gift for you. Just a little thanks to say thank you for gluing, I think, one of the best summits we've held within the CEO Institute and holding it together. Oh, there it is.
I know where they are. I'll give it to you.
No, come up here, let's get a photo. How dare you accept it that way?
There's the envelope you can give me as well. Okay. What have you got?
Doing your job.
What's that? You've got a gift for me? Oh, shock. Thanks, mate. Absolute pleasure.
Really good.
Thank you very much.
I also have a big thank you to Laurie. For those people that are aware, Laurie is definitely the other part of the glue that puts this function together for us for the CEO Institute. Does a tremendous job. And this year, by far, I think has put a fantastic list of guest speakers together. Confronting, very confronting, and also gives us, I suppose, a bit of inspiration and a little bit of thinking around, holy smoke, we are definitely confronted with change. Phase 4 of industrial revolution, and what are we going to do about it? And I think, Laurie, on behalf of everyone in this room, and I mean everyone in this room, tremendous job, and thank you very much. A bit of housekeeping, and then I'd like to do a quick wrap-up, and then let's get to drinks. Michael McQueen, that was awesome. I think that was a fantastic, I suppose, a spotlight on what's really coming over the horizon and for what we've got to consider selectively through that and what affects us and what's going to make us better leaders getting through this as we compete, I suppose, for the challenging elements that take our time away from the tightrope between leadership and good management. And I think the good thing about the CEO Institute, it definitely gives us our eyes wide open to what's coming over the horizon. But I think the last year's wrap-up was really about what are you going to do about it? It's all well and good. We've had a fantastic day. I use the summit personally as the beginning or the sunrise to the year, not the financial year, but the calendar year. And last year, surf was up. This year, we're selecting surf craft to go surfing with. We've had a lot of understanding of concepts of things that may potentially affect your business or not. But it's really up to you now what you do about it. And the good thing about the CEO Institute, it's the groups that we have around the syndicate members that create the let's talk this out and this is what I'm thinking about. And today wouldn't have been the success that it is without our sponsors. So I'd like to quickly thank TIMG. Firstly, TIMG, big round of applause for TIMG. Not only for the coffee, but TIMG do a lot more than fantastic coffee at the conference here. We have 8 members that are part of the TIMG business. They do fantastic understanding of your data needs and the end-to-end solution of what our businesses actually have in data. At the end of the day, when we sell our businesses or value our businesses, it's really about the data we capture and the way we use our data. They do a fantastic job of managing a lot of Australian businesses' data, and I'm sure data is high on your consideration of how you go forward, not only securing of it, but managing it, accessing it, creating it. And you heard every presenter today talk about how much data we're all producing. I think it's something like we double the amount of data now because of the video streaming stuff we heard earlier on this morning every year. So thanks TIMG. Maserati cars, what can I say? Very much with Adam. Amazing vehicles. I've stopped drooling. It only took till morning tea to do that. And now the passion of igniting, trying out there and test driving some of their newer vehicles is fantastic. It's fantastic to have them also as members and also as partners for the CEO Institute. King Living, sat next to Jack all day. It was great to get an insight to your business, and thank you very much for your support, both in sponsorship and in membership as well. And I think they are definitely on the wave of the new development and taking on their competitors head on, and I think they're going to succeed quite well. So thank you for your support. Pronto, national partners, and they also talked about the security of data, etc., and also the operational platforms and ERPs and all the things that we've got to consider about our businesses and future-proofing them, if I may. And I think that's a great partnership there. And Wilkin Butler and Coda as communication partners and nationally trending, I think is another round of applause that I'd like to join in as well. That's fantastic effort from the summit this year. And of course, not forgetting our new partners in the CEO Sleep Out at Vinnie's. Outside, please register. It's a fantastic activity that we can involve and evolve as well and raise some money for Vinnie's. And I think it's a fantastic partner. Where else would you go except for the CEO Institute to seek our support for? And I'd like us to think about how we can support and actually have some fun in trying to drive some funding for those guys as well. Wow is the only thing I've got as my summary. It's fantastic to understand the technology and robotics, the AIs, how we convert some of the fear to exhilaration, some of our passions that we're seeking and the jobs that we perform and the businesses that we perform today. Customer experiences and loyalty is still a strong theme coming through as it did last year, and really about last year we saw a bit of that robotics, and thank you very much, Peter, for sharing us Apollo's kind of transformation and guarantee people's livelihood, et cetera, but we saw a lot of that again this year. The tweaks, I think the twist that I've got out of this year is it's definitely a wavefront that's approaching our businesses, and again, it's back to us about, from leading it and managing it, what are we going to do going forward about those elements of considerations we need to have. And I still think it's about fixation and absolute gluing to what your passion and what the vision of your business is, and being flexible, I suppose, in how we go and deliver it. And that'll succeed or potentially fail our leadership or our management of those elements going forward. And I really think that the relevance and how we adapt is back to what I was suggesting about the CEO Institute and your syndicate group. So what I'd like to do in wrapping up is potentially suggest, unfortunately not everybody can attend. We've had some international flyers, we've had some last minute changes, etc. It's our roles. But when we do get back with our syndicate groups, I'd really like to, a Tasso word, but defrag this. What does this really mean for me? And what am I really going to step up to actually adjusting in either my vision, my journey plan that I'm going to take back with the challenges, and actually take this on head on as a group. No better place to talk about this discomfort of that than your syndicate groups. And for those people that have been, as you saw, a testament to the amount of members that we've had go on the journey with us for quite a considerable amount of time. And what's clear and what comes back to me from those folks is it is a safe place to be able to open up to our challenges as we have as leadership. It's pretty lonely up here. But more importantly, it's a chance where we can actually throw a few ideas around in a safe environment and actually turn to other practices of blood, sweat and tears to make us better leaders and better managers. So with that, I'd like to sort of close out in suggesting if we do any work at all, I'm not saying that the chairs should consider this or not, but I'd really like an understanding, I suppose, of fixating, is your vision right, and are we really set up to take on this next journey, the next year potentially, but really the next 3 or 5 years, and are we in the right place? And do we have the right team? And do we have all the challenges fixated in front of us? So I started with wow, I'm finishing with wow. I think this by far has been, for me anyway, one of the best summit meetings that we've had getting together. I felt quite engaging. I felt the speakers spoke to key issues, and I again thank Laurie for organising those speakers because they are right on note about the things that should be on our radars. And again, Michael's book, the signing's happening out there, and I also agree and confirm quite loudly that I think those elements of the radar need to be considered, and they are quite different for different businesses and different industries. Enough about my wrap-up of it. I'm sure you've got a wrap-up of it, and I'm sure your syndicate groups at least spend at least 10, 15 minutes when we next get back together in a couple of weeks for most of us, or 3 weeks. Without further ado, again, thanks for all your attendance, for the input, and look forward to next year's summit, and obviously hope that it's as successful as this one, because as I said before, I think this is a fantastic sponsored event for us to challenge our ideas and thinking, and for us to become better leaders, I suppose, at the end of us, as we walk that tightrope between good management and good leadership, and how do we become better at balancing the two in becoming better people, I suppose, in the leadership roles that we have in our businesses. Enough of that. Let's get some drinks and some more networking. Please visit the rest of those booths and stuff. And again, thank you very, very much. And a round of applause for everybody for your attendance, your input, and again, a fantastic summit that we'll, I'm sure we'll read about and talk about in the near future. Thanks again.